regarding Sky Lemons-Dixon, the homicide that occurred on December 25th, still under investigation, still active and ongoing. We have a number of plausible theories and explanations as to what could have happened with that one, and we still have not zeroed in on any particular motive at this point. But there are several plausible explanations as to what happened with that incident. The homicide that we had, or the shooting that we had on January 3rd at Hudson Avenue, that victim in that incident passed away this past Friday. His name is David Cooley, 36 years old. The suspect, of course, in that one was 36-year-old Rakeem Tillery, and he was shot and killed during an altercation with the New York State troopers on the evening of that shooting. On January 5th, at about 6:55 p.m., we had a shooting on the 2200 block of Henry Johnson, in which a 13-year-old male was struck in the leg. During that incident, two groups of males passed each other in the parking lot. Words were exchanged, and shots were exchanged between those groups of individuals. That investigation is still active and still ongoing. In terms of notable arrests that we've had since we've had our last update, we've had a significant arrest with respect to commercial robberies in our city. And a Marquise Val, a 27-year-old homeless male from Albany, was involved in several commercial burglaries. That person was arrested, and those crimes were cleared. And we also have a 45-year-old individual from Albany, Henry Villalongo. He's a parolee, and he also was arrested for commercial burglaries in the city. He has been arraigned and remanded. So with that, I'll go into 2023 statistics and our year-end overview of what happened in the city. And as we can see, with most of in this case, all of the major categories, we saw decreases from 2022. And cost for service increased, which really tells that the demands for service, despite being short-staffed, despite some of the other activities that have happened in the city, the cost for service for our officers still increased. Homicides increased by 1. I will talk about that later in the presentation. Our shots fired, gun arrests, gun recoveries. We've had some decreases in those. Gun recoveries, I'll show this in one of the slides coming also, but over 600 illegally possessed weapons over the last 5 years have been confiscated in our city. And when we're talking percentages, shooting incidents down 27% from last year. Shooting victims, 26%. What's notable about some of these, and I think all of our shooting categories, is during the summer, we saw a significant decrease in activity. And inexplicably, we had an increase during the month of December in a lot of these categories. But overall, down 26%. Burglaries, down 20%. Something that we really focused on this year. Took a lot of complaints from people in the community about burglaries and some of our property crimes. It was leading to fear of crime, perception of crime, and so we made a concerted effort in the city to deal with some of these property crimes in the city. And motor vehicle thefts, significant, down 34%. There was a time when we were 30 or 40% over in motor vehicle thefts. And during that period of time when we had these increases in motor vehicle thefts, those stolen vehicles were being used in a lot of violent crimes that we were seeing in our city. Individuals were leaving their cars running and unoccupied, and people were jumping in those cars, stealing those vehicles, and we would later learn that those vehicles were being used in violent crimes in our city. And so we attribute some of the decreases in our violent crimes in our city simply by lowering the number of vehicle thefts that we've seen, and by some of the public service announcements, by the enforcement and education campaigns that we had, the cooperation from members of our community, and understanding that it's very important to make sure that their vehicles are secure and that they are not left running and unoccupied. And so this 34% decrease is a hidden statistic that really contributes in a major way, we think, to some of the violence that we were seeing in our city. And now I'll go to our 5-year comparisons. This is because it's important to see where we were and where we are now. And I talk about this a lot, and I've talked about it in a lot of our other press briefings, how we had this significant spike right around COVID. And as you can see, when we were in 2018, 2019, we had a fairly steady amount of activity with this in this category of crime and in others that you will see following this one. And just like other cities across this country, in 2020, we saw this significant spike in activity. And in this case, in confirmed shots fired. And this spike in activity took a lot of municipalities, a lot of jurisdictions around this country by surprise. And there's a lot that we theorize contributed to that. But the fact of the matter is, just about every urban city and even non-urban cities across this country saw this spike in 2020. But the important thing for us is after we recognized that we had this spike, and we started to diagnose and assess what were the contributing factors with this, and we started putting together a plan to address these things, we started to see that a slow but steady decrease in that activity. And as you can see, with confirmed shots fired, we're trending to a place where we will soon be, we are not there yet, if not, we will soon be at a place where we will be at pre-pandemic levels in terms of shots fired in this city. So clear and convincing evidence of progress in terms of addressing an issue that sprung by surprise us and other municipalities across this country. And you can see the same thing with shooting incidents. And you see that same increase right around 2020. We had a blip right around 2022 in our city. But the general trend line with this follows what we saw with confirmed shots fired. We're trending to a place where we are very close, if not already there, to where we were at pre-pandemic levels in the city. And shooting victims, perhaps the most dramatic decrease that we're seeing, because these represent actual people who have been traumatized and hurt. Some have been killed in our city. And as you can see, that number was just unimaginable in 2020. And because of partnerships that we have in our community, because of policies that were put in place, because of support from our elected officials, because of hard work from police officers and other municipal employees in the city, we're seeing the same trend line since 2020 in our city as it pertains to shooting victims, to the point where we are very close, if not already there, to where we were at pre-pandemic levels. Clear and convincing sign and evidence that significant progress has been made since we had just this dramatic and increase in activity in 2020. Guns recovered. Trend line is going up with that one. And it's important because with homicides, 80% of homicides are committed with firearms. Most of those firearms are illegally possessed firearms. So the more of those firearms that we illegally possess firearms we can get off the street, the safer our streets become. And so as we've seen this decrease in major activity in our city, we've seen the trend line in illegally possessed firearms increasing. And then we have homicides. And again, pre-pandemic, we were in a place, and we had that increase in homicides in 2020. But unlike the other categories, our homicides have stayed relatively flat over all of these years, these last 3 years. And our expectation has been, as our confirmed shots fired and our shooting victims and our shooting incidents decreased, we were expecting a corresponding decrease in our homicides. Because, like I said before, 80% of homicides are committed with firearms. So if you have fewer firearms-related incidents, then it's logical to assume that you would see that corresponding decrease in homicides. But it hasn't happened. It's flat over the last 3 years. So we had to take a deeper dive into why this is happening. And here's what we found when we looked at our homicides. And this is for calendar year 2022, but it's pretty much the same in the other years as well. And what we found that 16 out of our 20 homicides that we had last year involved individuals who know each other. These are interpersonal conflicts. These are incidents where victims were specifically targeted by individuals that they know. And out of those 16, 9 of those homicides were domestic related. And then we have some of the other ones that involve long-running feuds between individuals that just spiraled out of control. And then we had a couple involving fights at bars or restaurants where individuals got into it, had some sort of conflict, some sort of dispute, and that dispute just spiraled out of control and devolved into some extreme violence. So 16 out of those 20 involved people who know each other. And may I add, one of those 20 was a motor vehicle accident. It was a negligent homicide, so that wasn't an intentional homicide. So when you contextualize this, really what we're looking at is 16 out of 19 intentional homicides in this city were committed between people who actually know each other. So I want to stay on this one for just a second here. And so the message with this, and when we're looking at our homicides in our city, why are we this outlier in terms of homicides that we're seeing locally and that we're seeing nationally? And what we're seeing is that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the homicides that we're seeing in our city involve interpersonal communication, interpersonal disputes between individuals who know each other. That's why it's critically important that we have community-wide involvement in addressing this, because interpersonal disputes by themselves are not things that police departments will be able to solve alone. We can't be in every bar. We can't be in every restaurant. We can't be in people's homes when these incidents are spiraling out of control and devolving into this extreme violence. So one of the things that we've done in order to address this, once we started, because we started to see this trend last year and even the year before last, is bringing in some professionals to help us help the community navigate through some of these things that we're dealing with. Because if we have the vast majority of our homicides involving individuals who know each other and have these interpersonal disputes, then we as a community have to do what we can to help our people in the community navigate this. And so we have social workers that'll be working with us in our police stations. What we found is that a lot of individuals come to our police stations looking for help that really not a police matter, something that's happening in the home. They just don't know how to navigate it. They don't know where to go for resources. And our officers, if it's not a police matter, we can tell them where they can go for help. We can give them a sheet of paper with some resources that can help them find a place to go. But what we wanted to do was have some people on hand 24/7 in our station. So when individuals come in and they have these sort of interpersonal type issues occurring in their home or in the streets or in our bars or restaurants, and they come to us for help, we have a person that can help them navigate it on the spot. It won't solve every homicide. It won't stop us from preventing every homicide that we'll have in the city, but it may help us prevent 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or more of these homicides. If someone comes in and they get help from a professional that prevents a situation from spiraling out of control into violence, then we can prevent some of this. So this is one thing that we're doing. You know, we're going to have some conversations. I've already had conversations with members of our faith-based community. You know, we've got to get people in our community who are respected, who have influence in our community to help us get the message out to people that there are different ways of handling and managing these interpersonal conflicts. We'll be having we have new leadership in ACPAC, the Albany Community Police Advisory Committee. I have a meeting with them tomorrow. We're going to talk about what can our community members, our community advisory members do to help members of our community navigate through this. These are interpersonal conflicts that are spiraling out of control. So as a community, we've got to figure out how we can best help people manage those sorts of things. And so as we're talking about our successes that we had last year and some of the trends that we're seeing, you know, I think it's significant that in our shooting categories, we're down 26% in the major categories. You know, a 10% decrease overall in Part 1 crimes. And Part 1 crimes are the violent crimes and the property crimes combined. Usually our target for decreases there are somewhere around 5%. We had a 10% decrease last year. 140 illegally possessed weapons taken off the street last year. Any one of those weapons could have been used to further harm and further traumatize, maybe even kill members of our community. That's significant when you talk about that many guns taken off the streets. 100 gun arrests. These are individuals who've already shown the tendency and a propensity for violence. They are in possession of illegally possessed weapons. We're taking as many of these individuals off the street as possible so they can no longer cause harm and trauma to members of this community. And our challenges. You know, we see this intermittent spike in violence every once in a while. Despite the significant decreases that we've seen in overall crime and gun crimes, we still see every once in a while a spike. For example, during Mother's Day weekend, toward the end of this year. So we're working to see if we can better anticipate when some of these spikes may occur. Some of the things that we're talking about with prevention efforts can have an impact with some of these spikes that we're seeing, but it's a frustration that we are constantly working on, and that's something as we move into this year will be a focus for us. And again, this interpersonal nature of homicides is just a frustration that we've got to, as a community, deal with. Police departments alone cannot deal with the homicides if they are majority interpersonal in nature. Can't be in every house. Can't be in every bar and every restaurant when these things are devolving into extreme violence. And then, of course, this proliferation of weapons in our community. We continue to see that. There are just so many guns that are on the streets, and these guns are easily accessible, and individuals who have low impulse control and a lack of conflict resolution are using these guns to handle their disputes. So we as a community, again, have to do what we can to help with conflict resolution issues, interpersonal communication, interpersonal disputes that we're seeing with some folks in our community, a lot of the things that I just talked about. And as we move into this year, here are some of the things that we will be focusing on to try to keep the trend that we're seeing in terms of violence decreasing, guns being taken off the street, individuals who are committing violence in our community being dealt with. You know, we want to, right now, we're in the process, we started this late last year, looking at the hot spots that we had designated, not just last year, but the year before and the year before that. And we're looking at activity before and after the hotspots, after they had been designated as hotspots. We're looking at what sort of resources were put into those hotspots and what were the results. And the preliminary results are, as those areas that had been designated as hotspots and that had increased resources devoted to them, we saw decreased amount of activity in those areas. You know, an example is the 2nd and Judson area, 1st and Quail area. You know, we saw increases in activity in those areas, significant increases in those areas 3 or 4 years ago. They were one of our designated hotspots. We devoted some resources in there, and we saw some improvement, some significant improvement in some cases in activity in those areas. And we have others as well. And so, not to say that crime in these hotspots has been totally eliminated, but there has been some clear and convincing evidence that by devoting some resources and some attention to these hotspot areas, that it yields positive results. And so we're looking at the areas that we designated as hotspots last year, and we're going to be looking to see what are the results. What type of activities have we had in those areas? What sort of resources did we devote into those areas, and has it been effective in that sense? We're going to continue working with the county, with the Department of Mental Health, to strengthen some of these partnerships with some of the programs dealing with mental health in our city. One of the major complaints we get is individuals who have mental health issues, in many cases severe mental health issues, who are engaged in activities in some of our places in our city that make people uncomfortable, and sometimes they're involved in criminal activity. And so we're working with the county to become a part of a program that pairs police officers and firefighters and other first responders with mental health professionals, so we can get these individuals help when it's necessary and not always have to have police officers as first point of contact with those incidents and with those folks. Again, I talked about the social workers in the stations. We want to activate those as soon as we can this year. We want to strengthen our partnerships with our our federal, state, and local partners. I had a meeting late last week with the head of the FBI in this area. We've had meetings with the head of the national ATF, and we've had several meetings with our state police and other local partners. You know, it's important that we strengthen those type of partnerships, and that the value of those partnerships was shown when we had the homicide on Hudson Street, where we had members of the Albany Police Department, civilians in our Crime Analysis Center, and state police troopers who were all working very closely together in order to find the person who was responsible for that and make sure that that person could be taken into custody. And of course, we want to make sure that we have these community-wide conversations about what this all means. It's important that the community knows that yes, there is some significant progress that's being made. Yes, guns are being taken off the street. Yes, people are being arrested. But there are a number of problems that the police department alone cannot solve. You know, these problems involving interpersonal disputes that are just spiraling out of control, and the lack of impulse control, not giving some of the folks in our community the tools and the resources to navigate through some of these things. Those are problems and issues and challenges that as a community we have to address, and that's why one of the focuses this year is to have some wider community conversations so that we're all on the same page, so we all understand what these issues are. We all understand what the capabilities of our public servants are. so that we don't have frustration as we're dealing with these things, and we have constructive dialogue and constructive partnerships to address these things. And with that, we'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Chief. And again, my condolences go out to the family of a homicide victim who we were all, I think, appalled at the homicide that occurred. But I also want to acknowledge and thank the Albany Police Department, our Crime Analysis Center, and the State Police for their quick response to that. With respect to the shooting incident that occurred at 200 Henry Johnson, yes, that is a city building. There were, the building was closed at the time of the incident. There was property damage that occurred at the building. The chief and I have met with all of the employees in that building, and we are looking at additional safety measures that we can take to ensure that our employees at that building feel safe. And we are also getting down to the real issue, which is, you know, fortunately, when I've spoken before and we've talked about who's been involved in gun violence in our city, I've been able to stand here and say that really fewer than 10% of our suspects in gun incidents, shooting incidents, have been juveniles. But we have seen an uptick in incidents involving juveniles, not all of them involving guns, but certainly concerning and challenging behaviors with respect to our juveniles. I've reached out to the superintendent of the Albany City School District. We will be meeting this week to talk about additional strategies that we can put in place. I mean, one of the things that we need to understand is what is it that we have been doing that has resulted in fewer juveniles being involved in this type of activity, so that we can understand where we're being successful, and then what do we need to do to connect individuals who have not been able to connect with those services, with those opportunities, to connect with those opportunities. We have a significant amount of funding, thanks to Governor Hochul, for violence reduction that is aimed at that 14 to 24-year-old age group. That includes funding to give people jobs. It includes funding to ensure that people have access to the services that they need. And so we want to ensure that we are communicating effectively with those who are in contact with our youth who may need those services, to connect them with those services and with those opportunities. When we have a 13-year-old who is with an individual who is carrying a gun, and that individual and another individual actually use those guns, that's a huge concern. And so we want to make sure that we're communicating with that individual, with that person's family, with their teachers, with anyone who is coming into contact with these youth who are very much at risk, and connecting them. And so we're going to be, as I said, following up with the school district, and we have resources available. This is not a situation where we're looking at the community, we're looking to the state, we're looking to other funding organizations to say, we need you to help us. We're fortunate in that because of the proactive work that has been happening at the state level and the funding that the governor has provided to us, that we do have funding available. Now it's ensuring that we're connecting really at that person by person level, that family to family level, to be able to get those resources where they need to be. And I just want to echo with respect to the interpersonal nature of the challenges that we're seeing. When the chief talks about domestic incidents, this is not a case of domestic violence the way that some people might think about it, right? Most people, when they think about domestic violence, think about most often a female victim, a male perpetrator. What the chief is talking about are incidents that are domestic in nature, in that they're among people who are related to each other. So it might be the brother of a girlfriend who's upset with her the boyfriend of his sister. So these are interpersonal relationships, and as I've said before, it's very rare that the first fight is the one that leads to a homicide. So for those who are out there who are struggling in a relationship or who see that there is a problem or a challenge in a relationship, we encourage you to reach out. There are resources available. We want to do all that we can to de-escalate these types of conflicts before they rise to the level where somebody is getting seriously hurt or tragically killed. But when you add guns to the mix, it increases the potential for a fatal outcome. And that is what we are seeing. Far more people have guns today than what we were seeing 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And when you add a gun to a volatile mix, sadly, we are seeing the consequence of that in our community. And it's tragic, and it's something that, from the standpoint of the chief, the police, my office, our entire city infrastructure and workforce, we wish that we could solve this problem. But as the chief said, we can't be in every living room. We can't be in every home. And so we really need to have that community conversation around what the norms are going to be in the city of Albany and what our expectations are going to be of one another. I understand that during the pandemic, fears were heightened. A lot of people went out and acquired weapons. And we are seeing the consequence of that in this significant number of homicides that we're seeing. It's still far too high. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable anywhere. It's certainly unacceptable in the city of Albany. And so we're going to continue with the efforts that the chief outlined to hold ourselves accountable to working to get that number reduced. So with that, we can open it up to any questions.
Mayor, what is the timeline to get that Accord and street treatment programs up?
So the street treatment program is underway. The provider that the county is going to operate that program. We're providing funding to the county for the program. They are in the process of hiring for that program, and the goal is to have it up and running in April.
And then for the implementation of Accord in the city?
So the Accord, we are at this point in a review process. So what we're doing with step one is hiring social workers at our precincts. And our ideally, and what we have budgeted is to be able to have 24/7 coverage of social workers at the precincts. We're going to be looking at data. We're going to be looking at the street treatment program and the outcomes of that, and then determining probably towards the second quarter of 2024 how we would build with our police officers a program that would result in deployment of those social workers on actual calls. Our police department and fire department are involved with the street treatment program because they're the ones that are most often called to the person's disturbed, or somebody's having an overdose, or we've found somebody who is clearly having some sort of medical or mental health crisis. And so part of the work around making Accord an option in an urban environment like ours is to understand the interconnection between our police, our fire, EMT, paramedics, and how we would best deploy those social workers on those actual calls.
Many residents have voiced, a need for an intergenerational community center. Are there any plans to come up with a plan for that this year?
Absolutely. So we've purchased the building for the West Hill Community Center, and we have released the RFP for the design of our Hoffman. So we're really thinking, Albany West and Albany South. And the vision for both of those is very much an intergenerational safe space. What we heard from the community in West Hill was over and over again, the desire to have a place where people feel safe. And so we are going to be working with the community in the final design of the West Hill Community Center, and with taking into account what does that safety look like and feel like in that physical plant, in that space that was beloved as the old Boys and Girls Club. So we've had great feedback from the West Hill community, and the vision for it, and what we have said over and over again to the folks that are going to come and help us do the design, is that this is a community center that's not. It's not a typical recreation center. This isn't your suburban YMCA. Our community wants spaces where they can come, be in community with one another, where our seniors can come, where young people can come, and where folks can feel safe, where they can have access to resources like mental health resources, information about legal questions that they have, questions that they have when they're concerned about being evicted, questions that they have about how to access affordable housing. That's what a community center in our city is. That's what it needs to be about, and that's the space that we're going to be creating. So I'll be very excited to cut the ribbon. We have tight timelines on these, but we want to get them open as soon as possible.
Yes.
You mentioned the emphasis on burglaries this year to really drive that number down. Can you elaborate a little bit on how the department goes about driving that number down?
Well, it's more of a community type effort. You know, it's awareness, because a lot of the burglaries that we saw were the result of just carelessness on the part of some of the owners. So that was part of it, making sure that we did that. A lot of it was amping up our CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. And we have officers who have been specifically trained in that. And whenever we had these burglaries, then we were making sure that we were getting out and really hammering down on some of the CPTED stuff. Making sure that the shrubbery, the lighting, and a lot of those things were addressed. Because what we were finding is that CPTED has been around for a long time, sometimes we may have not emphasized the importance of that in the past in terms of addressing some of those things. So that was one piece of it, and then also just having our officers, our detectives, aggressively finding out who were committing these burglaries and taking them into custody. Because as I had mentioned at the beginning of this, in many cases, these individuals who are committing these have committed many of them. They're responsible for several of these burglaries. So by taking these individuals off the street, it makes a significant difference. In fact, there was one month, and I can't remember exactly what month it was last year, but we had a string of them, and our burglaries had actually increased from the previous year, something like 10 or 15%. We ended up finding one or two individuals who were involved in these burglaries, and the burglaries almost shut down substantially, in the city. And so all of those things together can help to really deal with some of these property crimes. And it's important because the property crimes really do lead to fear of crime and perception of crime.
And another point on those motor vehicle thefts. Do you happen to know how much of that was the reduction in the, I know a lot of the cars were keys undid, you can just basically plug and drive off. Do you know how much of the reduction was in that, simply fixing that problem through the manufacturers?
I don't think that was much of an impact at all in our reduction. I think most of our reduction was the public safety announcements that we had. We had a large education and enforcement campaign that went on for about 2 months. And for the first month or so, we just educated people. We'd see a car running, officers would go up to the car, person would come out, and we give them a warning. And word started to get out a little bit. And then after that, we started actually enforcing by issuing citations and such. And after that, we started to see a significant decrease in the amount of motor vehicle thefts that we were seeing. And again, that was critically important for us because many of those stolen cars, so many of them, were being used in violent crimes in our city. And by simply taking away that opportunity, and we think that had an impact on some of the reductions in violent crime that we saw.
And on the
don't know what the dispute was, but I can tell you that it followed a trend that we've seen, that we saw all of last year, and that we've seen with the first couple of homicides this year. And that is that the individuals knew each other. In fact, these two individuals knew each other very well. Don't know what triggered the dispute between them. Don't know how it spiraled in that sort of way. But it's frustrating because it really is symbolic of what we're seeing in our community. Last year and this year, the first homicide this year we had on New Year's Day, two individuals at a New Year's Eve party get into a dispute, get into an argument, and one takes out a gun and shoots the other. You know, we're seeing so much of that senseless sort of interpersonal violence. And if, as a community, if we can really get our arms around this and really work together to address the interpersonal nature of this, we can drive our homicides down to levels of where we haven't seen in decades probably around here. Because if you got 16 homicides that are all among people who know each other, and many of those are, like the mayor said, domestic related, you know, if we can deal with those sorts of things, then our homicides are down well below what the national average is. But I'm confident, I'm optimistic as we move into this year, because we have a lot of people who want to work with us on this. We have a lot of individuals from our faith-based community, from our community groups, who understand that, you know, this is not solely a police problem. This is a community problem that revolves around managing and navigating conflict.
Chief, we've seen similar cities such as Schenectady implement drones as first responders. We've also seen cities like Troy implement more civilian-based police academies. Do we think that that might be something Albany would be interested in taking apart or taking part upon?
Absolutely. In fact, we were one of the first communities to have drones in our city. You know, we've had drones in Albany. I think, in fact, when I arrived here 5 years ago, one of the first initiatives that I supported in this community was finishing out what had been started, and that was a drone program. It had stalled for a while, and when I got here 5 years ago, we had some of you may remember, I started some community conversations about what this means, because there's huge privacy concerns with it. People, they just don't know what this means. And so we had a lot of community conversations, a lot of community events where we talked about what it meant, and we implemented our program probably a little bit right around 5 years ago. And what was the other issue that you talked about?
Troy had implemented a civilian-based police academy to get more civilians involved with helping out on smaller issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great program, and it's a program that we've had for years here in Albany. And you're right. It brings in people from the community so they can almost take ownership of their department. And we've gotten rave reviews from it. We just had a class that graduated, I think, a couple months ago or so. Great programs. We've had them for a while. We plan to continue having those programs.
Chief, as far as the guns, the confiscated ones, is that just by Albany Police, or does that include ones that the sheriff or state troopers may have?
So those are just Albany numbers. So to your point, the numbers are actually higher than that, because we don't include state police and sheriff's department numbers in those.
And do you know, like, of the ones you confiscated, how many of them were untraceables, either having the serial numbers filed off or those ghost guns that people can make?
Yeah, we're 5 years ago, ghost gun confiscations probably comprised somewhere around 2 to 3% of the illegally possessed weapons that we've had. Now in the double digits. We're seeing more and more of them. They're easy to obtain. You can quickly put them together, and you're right, they're untraceable in a sense. So we're seeing a lot of those. We're in terms of defaced weapons, we have a few of those as well. But what we have seen, though, is that the overwhelming majority of the illegally possessed weapons that we can trace are coming from outside of the state of New York. And we're seeing a lot that register from some of our southern states that have these lax gun laws, where people can buy these weapons en masse and they can take them to other parts of the country and easily sell them. And so that's why we're strengthening our relationships with the ATF and some of these other federal agencies that can deal with some of the interstate transportation of these weapons, because we can't go to Georgia and conduct operations to find out who's bringing weapons into New York. You know, we can't go to South Carolina and Alabama and Mississippi and do that. But our federal partners have the resources in the jurisdiction to do that. And we're constantly letting them know that this is something that is a major issue for communities like ours. And you know, the mayor and I were at a conference, conference of mayors conference not too long ago, where we had a personal meeting with the national head of the ATF to ask just that: what can the federal government, what can our federal agencies do to help us to address this influx of weapons that are coming from out of the state? And quite frankly, there's just not a lot of answers. They're still looking for answers. They're still trying to find out themselves how they, even with their vast resources, how they can deal with this problem that's happening. And so we're fighting this battle. You know, we're doing it at the local level. We're doing all that we can, and we're appealing to help from our federal agencies. But it's a tough thing. So taking these guns off the street that we're seeing, and you know, over 600 over 5 years, and it's a Herculean task for all.